Hi, it's Beth at Manx Radio's newsroom. From time to time, people get in touch with us with stories that they are hoping we will follow. And this was one that I was really pleased to take up. I was contacted by a number of people following the retirement of Michele Moroney, the consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist, easy for me to say, at Nobles Hospital. She officially retired in May. As we'll hear, though, she's still working in some capacity. But there were some very special people who had a very special message for her. And just have a listen to this.
Hi, I'm Joanna Roberts. Michele Moroney helped me have my son 22 years ago. I am originally from Salford. We'd been struggling to have children, postcode lottery, and very hard to get IVF treatment. I was on a long waiting list. And then my then husband, got a job in the Isle of Man. And we moved over, and for a few months I wasn't focused on having children. And then, the urge came back and we were referred. But at the time, ironically, Michele was on maternity leave. Anyway, when she came back, I saw her and she was just like, right away, yeah, we'll get you on this. We'll do IVF. You've got no reasons why you can't. And this is what happens. And you fly to Leeds. And it was all so simple and straightforward. And as she said that, a ray of sun shone through the window behind her onto me, and I went, we're going to have a baby. She thought it was so funny that I'm like, she's a scientist, and I was like this ethereal, yes, everything's spoken to us. The effort she puts in for when you have IVF, she turns up out of hours so she can scan you and give you injections. It was our first go, and she was just brilliant. We went over to Leeds and came back, and you have this blood test, and she rang me and she went, it's a strong positive. And I couldn't speak. And then she goes on seeing you because she's an obstetrician as well. You don't lose that contact. And then she delivered my boy because he got into distress and had a section, and she delivered him. So it was the whole thing that she was there for. And I will ever be thankful for what she gave me, which I thought I'd never have. And she doesn't realise how amazing she is and how many families she's created.
And Joanna, I mean, it's such an emotional journey to go through, from that initial thought where you find out that you need to have some support to help you get pregnant, and the heartache of going through that, to have somebody, as you've described, like Michele Moroney, who's there, who's just took you through it. It clearly means so much.
It all just seems so straightforward. I lived on Ballacamine Drive, so I was round the corner from the old hospital. So to go there every day for my jabs was easy because you had to have daily injections. And I then started with hyperemesis, which is severe pregnancy sickness. It's not just like morning sickness. You are so poorly. I rang her and said, I can't even keep water down. And she went, come to the hospital. She just got me a bed. They kept me in for a few days to rehydrate me. Nothing was a problem. And I think part of it was because the Isle of Man is so brilliant in providing services, but also due to her, because everything was straightforward for her. Nothing was a faff. She just made it so easy. And that is so important because it can be hugely emotional and traumatic journey, but it just wasn't with Michele. 2 points here. One, a number of years ago, I tried to get her an honour, because what you do is you just gather a few people who have words to say about her, and you write off to the palace and so forth. Nothing ever came of that, which I thought was a travesty. But the other thing, I brought my son back to the island because we left the island a few years ago, and I brought him back, like I said, he's 21 now, to see where he was born and where he grew up and that. And we met up with her, and I said to her, do you realise how many lives you've changed? And she was like, must be a few. And I'm like, have you not kept count? She was like, well, no. And she's just so humble. When I was first going through treatment, I was talking to a girl at work, and at the time you couldn't speak openly about fertility treatment. As a woman in work then, you couldn't say you were trying for a baby because they'd assume you didn't have any career ambitions. I mean, even only 20 years ago, that's how black and white it was. And this girl said to me that her daughter was a result of fertility treatment with Michele. Then her sister also had a baby because of Michele. A friend who had moved to the Isle of Man like us had a baby through Michele. And so, just so many common links of close people that I knew who all had babies because of her. I remember I held my boy in Old Nobles, looking down at him. And even though women do that every day, it was like something I never thought. I looked down and thought, we've done that. I had him. And then what happened was, I then went on to have a baby naturally. You end up having these just perfect families. from something that you thought was, when everyone seems to have babies so easily and you can't, and then you have a baby, it's nothing short of miraculous. And I will forever be indebted to that humble woman for what she gave me.
So if you were able to say something to Michele now, knowing as we do that she doesn't really think she's due any credit in any shape or form, what would you say to her?
Well, I mean, and she's laughed at me before because I gush. Like I say, I'm gush and I'm all emotional, and she's scientific. And I would just say to her that at some point, if she could just take stock and look back at the families she's created and the lives she's brought into the world and the happiness that she's given to so many people, then she should be beatified, really, because, in a world where we're full of bad news and horrendous things happening on the news, she stands out head and shoulders above the rest as someone who has used science to make a lot of people very happy.
Greetings from Central West, New South Wales, Australia. Our son Cameron Russell was born on the 8th of April 2002 at the Jane in Douglas, Isle of Man. He was our second attempt to have a child via IVF. We met Mrs Moroney the year before, and from the first minute of meeting her, we fell in love with her gentle calmness and supportive nature. She made us feel like nothing was too much trouble, and she gave us our dream come true, a beautiful baby boy. I remember being in the very late stages of labour, and she walked past the room as I shouted, "Give me a caesarean," to which she calmly replied with a smile on her face, "It's a bit late for that now," and kept walking. It still makes me smile to this day. It's so hard to put into words what we owe her, and gratitude doesn't really scratch the surface. We left the Isle of Man when Cameron was 3 and moved to Scotland for 7 years, when we got the opportunity to head to Australia. This was the making of our son. He thrived and has become an incredible young man. He has dyslexia, but he's never let it stop him, and he is now in his final year at the National Institute of Drama. He has performed at the Opera House and during school was in a talent development programme for young performers. He is hoping to work in entertainment, in either lighting or sound, and has recently worked on lighting installations around Sydney for World Pride and Mardi Gras. He truly is a beautiful human, and we're so blessed to have him, thanks to Mrs Moroney. We hope you have a wonderful retirement. You have well and truly earned it. All our love, Sally, John and Cameron Russell.
Hi, I'm Linda Thompson. I'm the Clinical Care Group Manager for Integrated Women, Children and Families Care Group at Manx Care. Warm, kind, caring, passionate, team player and loyal. Driven, she's dynamic, she's evidence-based, she's very generous, and she is the biggest advocate regardless of whatever presents for women on the Isle of Man. I'll just give you some examples of where she's gone above and beyond. I arrived and met Michele on a working professional relationship in December 2019, and she was warm, she was open, and she made my move to the hospital very, very easy. I would meet her in the corridors and I'd say, "Where are you going with that wheelchair?" She said, "I'm just fetching my elderly patient from the corridor. She's got out of a taxi and I'm wheeling her up to my clinic and I'm going to change her pessary and then I'll take her back down again." She arrives early, she stays late to ensure that patients receive exactly what they require. She takes on the additional duties of her colleagues wherever they're in need, and she steps in last minute wherever is required. I think since the day she decided she was going to become a doctor and a gynecological and obstetric doctor, I think that has been her priority. I think that has been everything to her. That's what's allowed her to function. There was a quote which I read on social media a couple of weeks ago, whereby it actually says that nobody ever recognises what you do as an additional once you leave. The only ones who recognise the late night phone calls, the emails, the popping into work are your family. I can categorically say that's not the case for Mrs Moroney. She has gone above and beyond, and everybody who's worked alongside her will know that work has been her priority, and the women of the Isle of Man. I personally want to thank Mrs Moroney as well. For the 4 years that I've been at Nobles, she has enabled me to become steeped within gynecology and obstetrics. I personally have learned so much, and it's her commitment and ongoing commitment, because you do know I've not let her go completely. She's offered her services for the Women's Health Strategy vision going forward, and it's pleasurable to know that I've still got her working alongside as part of the team. So thank you, Mrs Moroney.
Hi, I'm Michele Moroney, and I've been obstetrician and gynaecologist at Nobles Hospital for 24 years prior to my retirement at the beginning of May this year.
What I want to do first of all, Michele, is for you to take us back. At what point did you decide this was what you wanted to do as a career?
Well, in terms of wanting to do medicine for a career, I mean, I can remember when I would have been about 11 or 12, I thought, I think I quite fancy being a doctor. And when I was 13, I was admitted to Noble's Hospital with appendicitis, and I can distinctly remember being asked by the anaesthetist before they put me to sleep. They said, "What do you want to do when you leave school?" So I said, well, I want to be a doctor. And his reply was, well, you've got plenty of time to change your mind. But I never did change my mind. I went to Manchester Medical School for 5 years. At that time, when you'd finish your training, you had to do a year of house jobs. So you had to do 6 months of general medicine, 6 months of surgery. And I did those, and medicine seemed a bit complicated. There were lots of drug names and things like that to remember, and surgery just seemed a bit messy. And so at the end of that year, I was thinking, well, what shall I do? And during my medical school attachment, I'd enjoyed obstetrics and gynecology. It was something that was a little bit jack of all trades, master of none. It had surgery involved, it had a lot of psychology involved, and then not too complicated medicines involved. And so, I applied for a job in Manchester, and that was basically the start of what I never really veered from that career. So then I would have been, 25. And I worked in Manchester first of all, and then I moved over to Sheffield for 5 years. At that stage, as part of training, you had to do a year out doing something slightly affiliated, and I chose to do gynecological endocrinology, so hormonal treatment, and that I think probably was the start of where I had my special interest in hormonal issues and fertility problems. And then I did my next clinical jobs in Sheffield, took my membership exams when I was in Sheffield, and then I moved up to Leeds to do infertility for 2 years.
I'm really interested in something you said there, thinking about the psychology of the work that you were doing, because that, I think, for many people who've been treated by you is a really important aspect of sort of understanding what people are going through.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that, certainly for a lot of gynecological issues, and certainly fertility per se, it is, I mean, fertility is not an illness, but yet in itself, couples that do experience fertility problems, they really struggle psychologically. It's not something they can discuss with their friends, with their family. It's a big issue in terms of their own mental health. And when couples are going through what it's a little bit of a cliche to describe it as a fertility journey, but it is a journey for many people, and for many it can take years before they hopefully reach their goal. And the ups and downs of anticipating treatment, waiting for results of treatment, it being unsuccessful, trying again, the psychological support is really important.
And in terms of how treatment for fertility has changed in the time that you've been involved, I mean, people facing that sort of journey nowadays, would you say it's easier?
I don't think it is easier, no, I don't. I mean, in terms of the fertility treatment itself, from a medical point of view, that actually hasn't changed. It hasn't changed over the years because all we're doing with IVF treatment is we're applying physiological processes. So you're not using new drugs to treat a condition, you're using natural hormones. And where the big improvements have been in IVF treatment over the last 20 years have really been in the laboratory side of treatment, and learning new techniques of now storing eggs to preserve fertility. So I think that the journey is still as difficult as it was. The success rates are improved, there's no doubt about that. The types of treatment now, I think obviously they are different because we've learned new techniques, and we're almost at a stage now where you would see an individual or a couple with a fertility issue, and you would not be in a situation where you would say, there's nothing that can be done. So with donor eggs, with donor sperm, all those advances in techniques allow more people to access that wish to found a family.
So you were in Leeds then. What
Yeah.
brought you back to the Isle of Man?
Well, I was in Leeds. I finished my full training in clinical obstetrics and gynecology in Leeds. And during that time, I met my husband. And my first consultant post was actually in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. One of the reasons for going, well, there were two reasons for going. My husband had worked out in the Middle East in the oil industry. And also at around about the time we were married, my father-in-law died. And we had to rehouse my mother-in-law in Ireland. So we had a significant debt. So we moved to Saudi Arabia for 2 years. 2 years was enough, and then it was time to return to Leeds and for me to look for a consultant's post. And it was simply fortuitous. It wasn't a plan to return to the Isle of Man. There just happened to be an advert in the British Medical Journal for an obstetrician and gynecologist with a fertility interest on the Isle of Man. And really, it could have been written for me. And consultants' posts didn't come up frequently here. I mean, obviously, I've been in post for 24 years. My colleagues before me have been in post for 22 years, 18 years. So at the time, there were just 3 obstetricians and gynecologists. And as I say, one of those posts became free. So I applied for the job.
What do you think little Michelle, who'd been telling the doctor when she had appendicitis, would have thought?
I don't know. Thought, what a stupid woman. I don't know. I don't know. It really sort of came full circle when I actually came over for the interview, because at that stage, the old Jane Crookall maternity unit, where I'd been born, had become Crookall House. So I actually had my interview in the same building that I was born in. So it seemed quite fitting, really.
And how did you find adapting to life back over here in terms, I suppose, of what the medical world was like compared to where you'd been?
Well, in terms of the job was the same wherever. It was the same in Saudi Arabia as it was in Leeds, as it was here. The conditions are the same, the treatments were the same. I think the difference, one of the things I found difficult was seeing my school friends' mothers as patients. And it was a very bizarre thing to see somebody as a professional when you're speaking to a lady that made your beans on toast when you were 10 years old. That was something that was strange. And the Isle of Man's a very different place. People know who their doctors are. They know you in the street. They speak to you in the street. And it is very much like you're a medium-sized fish in a small pond. So you can't do anything on the Isle of Man without somebody knowing you've done it. And usually they know you've done it before you've done it.
And when you're in the field of medicine that you've been in, talking about things like gynecology, there's that embarrassment there as well, isn't there? And I think being able to talk openly and not worry must be such a key part of reassuring your patients.
Yes, it is. I think I've obviously spent years talking about gynecological problems with infertility, obviously having to talk about sex, about intercourse, about difficulties. And I find it actually something that's very easy to do now. But I would say that I think the most awkward thing, and it's something that I think it's something you learn, was when I was a medical student and I was doing a surgical attachment and I had to go and take a history from a lady who had bowel cancer. And I went to see this lady and she was in her dressing gown, but she was a nun and she had her wimpole on, and I couldn't ask her about her bowel habit. So just because she was a nun. And yet she would have probably been quite happy to talk about her bowel habit. But you learn that really gynecological problems, colorectal problems, they are natural, they should be talked about. And yeah, I find it very easy to talk about sex now. It's fine.
Probably still not with a nun.
No, probably not. But probably not with a nun, no. No.
With regards to the work over here then, thinking particularly about fertility, what memories do you have, certainly in those early days, I guess, of when you've supported couples through that, it's been successful? I mean, from your point of view, how does that feel?
It's not just in the early days, it's still now. I actively get anxious about pregnancy test results. I really want everybody to be pregnant. I don't want to tell people bad news. I don't want anybody to have a miscarriage. I don't want anybody to have a negative pregnancy test. I think when I first came over here, I mean, the big thing was really setting up a satellite service. The IVF, it's a long process. It takes 10 to 12 weeks. It needs regular appointments to do vaginal scans, to monitor what's going on. And to be able to do that part of their treatment journey here just meant such a lot. It made things so much easier. People didn't miss work. And again, couples having IVF, there is a stigma to it. There still is a stigma to fertility problems. And they didn't want to discuss their issues with their work colleagues, their managers. And when they start missing work and disappearing for appointments, then people start adding one together, making 3 or 4. So yes, I would do my best to try to see ladies outside of their working hours, see them at weekends, see them in the evenings, just to make things that little bit more confidential for them.
Do you have any idea of how many babies you've been partly responsible for?
I was sort of thinking about that, and I suppose in terms of IVF cycles in Leeds, I probably would facilitate about 50 cycles a year, and then other IVF units probably another 20. So I guess I must have facilitated about, maybe 2,000 cycles, and I suppose in theory, if I'm looking at a 1 in 3 success rate, then yeah, about maybe 700 babies over the years, something like that. And that's just with IVF. Obviously, IVF is an ultimate fertility treatment, so there would be many more couples that would have problems that would only need second-line treatment. They may need medicines to get them to ovulate, or intrauterine insemination, treatments that we could have done here on the island.
So all those family lives that you've changed, how does that feel?
Well, it was my job. You know, that's it. I mean, I think it's a privilege to help people and to change people's lives and complete their lives.
I'm going to do something now. I'm just going to pause this recording because I want to play you something, and we'll just come back after you've heard this.
Why?
She's laughed at me before because I gush and I'm all emotional, and she's scientific. And I would just say to her that at some point, if she could just take stock and look back at the families she's created and the lives she's brought into the world and the happiness that she's given to so many people, then she should be beatified, really, because, you know, in a world where we're full of bad news and horrendous things happening on the news, she stands out head and shoulders above the rest as someone who has used science to make a lot of people very happy.
So we just heard a short clip of Joanna there, and I think, Michele, the overriding sense I get from everyone I've spoken to is that you are so humble about what you've done. I mean, you talk about it being a job, and yes, that's part of it, but you saw people out of hours, you supported them with phone calls, you made sure that they were okay along the journey that is as difficult as it might be for some people, and that is above and beyond.
I'm not sure that it is above and beyond. I have always believed if you're going to do something, you do it to the best of your ability. It's as simple as that. I think that is how it should be. I don't have any airs and graces. I like to feel that I'm approachable. It doesn't take patients very long to stop using Mrs Moroney and they'll call me Michele. I don't mind that. I just want people to be comfortable. And again, maybe it is being able to make somebody feel not vulnerable and more comfortable that again helps them psychologically with that support, that they believe that there is somebody there that really wants to do the best for them. And I do want to do the best for them. I always have done.
So you had your official retirement back in May.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you up to now? What's happening?
Well, at the moment, I'm still running the satellite IVF service and supporting the IVF on a limited contract. Also, we're looking at trying to improve women's healthcare and the provision of healthcare for women on the island. So helping with the women's healthcare strategy. And I've also very privileged actually to have been just put on the board of hospice. So again, I'm keeping myself busy and just slightly different orientation now. I must admit it was when you're younger and you're doing obstetrics and gynecology, and it was the excitement of doing emergency deliveries and getting out of bed in the middle of the night and delivering babies and feeling terribly good that you'd saved not just one life but two. Eventually it starts to wear you down, and it's just time to just put a little bit of brake on it and leave it to the younger ones.
And I guess emotionally as well, clearly you've been so involved, and unfortunately I suppose not every outcome is a positive one, and I just wonder how you've dealt with that side of things over the years.
When things don't go right, it is very disappointing, but again, it's not always, you're not going to win every time, and you pick the pieces up. You will always remember them. You will remember babies that were lost. You remember the very rare occasions that mums died. The IVF treatments that you thought had worked and ended as miscarriage, but you still move on, and knowing that what you're doing will help the great majority.
And then you have those moments where you meet the grown-up children.
I think it's more strange for them. I think usually it's acutely embarrassed teenagers where their mothers sort of gush and go, "Oh, and this is the lady that helped you be born," and you can see this acute embarrassment on these teenagers' faces. But it's quite strange to look up to a baby that you were involved with their creation, really.
We'll hear from some of the people, the patients that you've supported over the years, but would you have a message for any of them?
For them, I'm so delighted that their journey was successful and that their lives are changed by having their families.
And would you have done anything differently? Would you have told little Michelle at 13, don't take this path?
No, I don't think so. Would I do it again? I don't know. Maybe not with the change in training. I'm not sure, but no. My passion is still there.
And in terms of the future of fertility treatment on the island, how would you say it looks right now?
At the moment, I think that provided they keep giving me a contract, hopefully we're okay for a few more years.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.